Hey friends, Sadukie from Nimble Pros here. I'm currently working on moving the eShopOnWeb wiki to a documentation site. I've opted to go with GitHub Pages for many reasons. First, we get to keep the documentation with the project. I'm a fan of documentation, and especially when it's all together and easy to find. Another reason why I chose GitHub Pages is because they use Jekyll, which is yet another static site generator. As much as I complain about other ones, I'm okay in this case because it's GitHub that manages the Jekyll dependencies under the covers. I don't have to manage the site generator dependencies for the most part, and I like that. When I'm writing documentation, the last thing I want to do is maintain other people's code to generate my site. I just want it to work. That said, I still have to keep an eye on dependencies if we run it locally. However, GitHub maintains a list of dependencies with the specific versions of gems. Yes, I just said gems. Jekyll is Ruby-based and uses liquid templates. Now you know that if there's anything else I don't like about managing dependencies, it's that I don't like having to manage multiple versions of languages and libraries on my machine, only to be in dependency conflict hell on my machine. The GitHub instructions for running pages locally mentioned Ruby and Bundler. So let me show you how I'm working with GitHub Pages locally using a DevContainer. Visual Studio Code here. I'm currently in a docs folder in the eShopOnWeb repo. In my docs folder, I added a DevContainer folder. I put it in the docs folder so that I have a doc-specific DevContainer. I'm not touching the container that we use for developing the app itself. In my DevContainer.json file, I have a name for my container so it's clear which project I am working on. I include port 4000 and forward ports since that's the port Jekyll uses. I also include port 35729 for the live reload feature. In my post start command, I run the bundle install command to set up the application, then I run Jekyll's server with a few parameters. The base URL parameter is needed for the container because the docs do not live in a subfolder when run locally. We'll talk about the base URL when I show you the config file. The second parameter is live reload. This is so that I can make changes to the pages and see the changes fairly quickly. The third parameter is force polling. This is what enables Jekyll 3.x to generate new pages as well as trigger updates when we change the data in the _data folder. The devcontainer.json file also links to a Dockerfile. Let's go look at that. I am using a Ruby 3.3 image. Then I update the system for Jekyll's dependencies. Finally, I update the bundler and install the gem. So now that I have a dev container, let me show you how I have my Jekyll configuration. In the root of my docs setup, I have a config.yaml file, which has the important Jekyll values. There's base URL. We override it in our command to execute the Jekyll server when running locally. However, when we run our GitHub Pages with a GitHub Pages URL, then we need to set our base URL for the base for our documentation site. This may change if you have a custom domain set up for the docs, so be aware that you may need to change the base URL accordingly. The title and description will display on the site. I'll show you where these appear when we switch to the browser. The remote theme and plugin lines are there because I am using one of the GitHub Pages supported themes. The documentation for each supported theme includes what you have to put in the config file. I'm choosing the Midnight theme for now because I know many of our maintainers prefer dark mode. So this is what the documentation site looks like so far, and this is how live reload works. Notice that as I change the text in the main page and save it, that the page reloads. That's why I like the live reload feature. Now there's some customization here that I've added because I have been working in static site generators in Ruby for a while. The data folder is what Jekyll uses for storing data. Supported formats include YAML, JSON, CSV, and TSV. My _data folder has a YAML file with my navigation. I opted for YAML as it's what we use on other projects we maintain as well, such as DevIQ. The _includes folder allows you to use the include tag to include content from file in the includes folder. If you're familiar with the term server-side includes, that's what this is like. I have an includes folder so that I can extract my navigation code from the main layout and include it elsewhere. In the layouts folder, I have the overridden default.html. I've started with the default HTML that my theme uses, and then I've updated the header to use my custom nav layout. In the assets CSS folder, I have a style.scss for when I'm ready to override the CSS and add my own custom CSS. I'm doing this here specifically because that is what the theme documentation suggested for overriding the CSS. My gem file is fairly simple, and that's there so I can run this locally. Okay, let's add a page, and then we'll add it to the nav. We're going to add a folder for features. Let's add a file called index.md. We'll add some front matter for the page title. Now let's add some content. We recently added single sign-on with GitHub, role management, user management, a role membership to eShopOnWeb as part of our ASP.NET Identity in Action Implementing Individual Accounts course. So let's add a page for those features. We'll include a link to the course as well in case you want my explanations of the code and how it's implemented. Okay, so now that we've added this page, now let's add it to the navigation. So we have to go into our YAML file in the _data folder, and we're going to add our title and our URL. Notice as we save our changes to the data file that our page updates. This is because of the force polling. Now that you've seen how I run and edit my GitHub pages locally, I hope it inspires you to work with GitHub pages locally as well, without the frustrations of running into dependency chaos on your local machine. Happy coding!